I'm not bossy, I'm aggressively helpful. Hey darling, Boyce here. Welcome back to my channel. Here it is my goal to help you find your next book obsession. I am comfy, I am cozy, and I am ready to dive into today's video. Now today's guest has written 16 books in 5 years, built an entire Roman-inspired world from scratch, tracked all of it in 11 Excel spreadsheets, and then, just for fun, founded a publishing company. If you've spent any time in progression fantasy or the LitRPG space, you already know the name. I am sitting down with Selkie Myth, the author behind Beneath the Dragon Eye Moons. We're going deep today. Craft, risk, advice, and the decisions that divided readers. As well as what it actually feels like to finish a 16-book series. And what it means to go from figuring out the whole publishing industry to running your own press. Stick around for the whole thing, darling. I have got some fun facts about Selkie sprinkled throughout, and trust me, a few of them are going to surprise you. So let's get into it. Hello.
Hello, how's it going?
Great, how are you doing?
Good. I'm on my phone, unfortunately.
That's all right. It is my pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for chatting with me. Again, this is just going to be a really chill conversation. We're just chatting. And why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your publishing journey and get people up to speed on you if they somehow don't know about you?
All right. So I started back in 2020. And back then, when you first start writing, you're the new kid on the block. You're the new kid on the block for ages. And then one day you log on and you're not the new kid. You're the guy that's been there forever. And it's like, huh? Okay,
It's a
I
weird
guess,
feeling. It's a really weird feeling.
I guess, 2.5 years was enough to qualify me for old. And that was, and now it's been 6 years. So, I'm positively ancient by, Royal Road standards and all that. I started off my very first writing project ever was Beneath the Dragon Eye Moons. Mm-hmm. And, I went from there and I looked around and, I basically said, look, I see a lot of space here. I see a lot of things here. How can I best help people? And because that's what I like doing. I like helping people a lot. And, I've got a tax channel in my Discord where I help people out. I practically force other authors in my Discord to self-promote their stuff in my Reading and Rex channel. I try my best to give advice and help and whatever I can do for people. And I was like, okay, what's the next step here? What's the best way I can help people? And I said, okay, you know what? Publishing their stuff. That's the best way. I can give all the advice in the world, or I can say, I'll do it for you. And, I went to my good friend Raven Stagger and I said, Raven, I'm starting a publishing company. You've got 50 stories. Can you want to give me a few of them to start? And Raven was very kind and generous and said, yes, okay, I've got these 4 stories that, nobody will touch with a 10-foot barge pole, do your work.
Good luck.
Dead Tired was one of them. It was actually our very first, and it exploded out the gate with, the big announcement that I'm starting a new publisher, and it did very well. And, from there, we very quickly got Ultimate Level 1 as, one of our early picks, and that did very well. And from there, we've just snowballed, and we've been able to help more and more people. We've been able to sign more authors. We've been able to expand our operation. We've been able to, as I said, just do more. And, it's really satisfying to send really big checks to people because it's like, I'm sending you hopefully a life-changing amount of money and it's regular. And, it's, a lot of people have said, I can now write full time because of what you're doing. And it's like, yes.
That's fantastic.
I'm successfully helping people. And all while I've been doing this, I finished up Beneath the Dragon Eye Moons, 16 books, some 2.5 million words. An epic by any definition. Mm-hmm. I believe I am one of the longest completed LitRPGs that's published. Mango Media came from...
I'm repping the merch. I like it.
Elaine's love of mangoes in the book. I was like, okay, you know what? That's fun. It's alliterative. It's got some meaning to it. Sure, let's do it. And now I'm writing Song of the Gift Giver while I'm also working on publishing. And yeah.
And occasionally getting some sleep in between all of that.
Yeah. And having a kid and, and
oh my
all
goodness.
that.
Oh my goodness. That's a lot. I don't know how you do it.
I don't know how I do it either.
Actually, so I gathered a lot of fan questions for today, and
Yeah.
the one that I saw more than anything was if somebody said that they don't like mangoes, how deep would you bury them?
So
I
everybody
was like,
talks
that's so
about
dark.
everybody talks about stories with the self insert, right? Where the person is writing themselves as the main character, right?
Yeah.
I am an unfortunate victim of the rare reverse self insert
Okay.
where I give a character a trait and everybody assumes that this is my trait.
Yes.
Even my wife has done it. She keeps buying me, dried mangoes as a snack. And they're tasty enough, but it's just, to me it's like it's just a fruit. It's a tasty fruit to be sure, but like I I wrote a character and I wrote a character with strong characterization, but that doesn't mean the character is me. And that's something that often gets lost in these spaces where people read characters and they assume that this reflects the author, and it's not necessarily the author. The author is writing a character.
Hmm.
And this can go quite wrong sometimes when people try to write villains or other characters that are supposed to be bad, that aren't supposed to be liked, and readers assume that this is the author themselves, not the author writing a character.
Hmm.
Um, Now, it's different when it is the author themselves doing that. That's, possibly a different thing, but there's often a conflating of the character and the author that is not necessarily fair or accurate. That, I feel sometimes, especially in this age of, the hyperconnected internet,
Hmm.
can be misassigned.
Gotcha. So if somebody wants to troll you, they should just give you mangoes for the rest of your life. This is the takeaway there.
Pretty much. But, it also makes a fun joke. It makes a fun running gag. It makes it, a nice reference, and as I said, they're pretty tasty. Why not?
Yeah. So let's dive into the questions and just
Sure.
get rolling. The first one is a combination of my questions and fan questions, and they're more about just your approach and the characterization and such. So the first is, I mean, like you said, you have a finished series, a 16 book series. So what does done actually feel like when you've been living in that world for so long?
Frankly, it was like Frodo throwing the ring into the fire. Oh my God, it's over. It's done. I can rest.
I can go back to the
Because
Shire and sleep.
yeah, pretty much because like it just took so much. I poured my heart and soul into it for half a decade,
Mhm.
and like it is exhausting at the end because writing is interesting. There's a lot of jobs, a lot of that I held where you wake up, you're kind of tired, but you can drag yourself into work. You look at the spreadsheets half tiredly, but you can still do your job. You can still do everything that works. Writing, though, it demands that you are at 100%, or rather above 95%. You've got to be very on top of it, and if you're
Yeah.
under 95%, you're not going to do very well. And, that makes it particularly tricky. With a job, you drag yourself in, you're at 60%, you can still do it.
Yeah.
But that whole gap between 60 and 95%, you could work a job, you can't write. It's difficult to manage.
And when you do, you very often end up deleting your work, which is very, very frustrating. At least
Yeah,
that's been
or
my experience. I shouldn't speak for you.
particularly slow, and that also has its own set of frustrations of I got nothing done today. I thought only 1,000 words.
Which, on one hand, it's better than no words. But
Right.
when you're used to
But like
producing, I mean, how many words do you write per day on average, do you think?
my goal, I am happy if I write 2,000 words in a day.
Hmm.
And I've noticed as well that that's sort of the almost the critical marker for success. I don't know very many Royal Road stories that do well at less than 10,000 words a week.
Yeah,
Um, that seems to be the inflection point.
I agree. Yeah.
And fortunately, I'm finding it harder and harder. And, I have to do some sitting down, some serious thinking to balance Mango Media and its increasing demands on my time with writing. And it's like, okay, I don't want to have to pick, but maybe I will have to pick. I don't want to because I've made a commitment with Song of the Gift Giver.
Yeah.
And I want to finish that.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that more at the end of the interview for sure, because I've got a lot of questions about that too. People are really excited for it.
Yes.
So, I guess looking back at book one, now that you've finished 16, and this is a very loaded question, but what do you think you would change?
It's interesting because, so it's worth mentioning that I already went back and edited book one
Oh, okay.
quite a bit. So, there was definitely a pass over where I strengthened quite a few aspects of this story. I've reread book one, and it was very interesting that I had almost a completely different style of writing then.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I wonder if that was a better style of writing than what I have now.
Oh, interesting. Okay, tell me more about
And,
that.
I really went into details. I went into the weeds. I, explored every little corner. But now I am much more focused. It is much more tightly written. It much more cuts to the heart of the problem and cuts to the heart of the characters. And I spend less time fluffing around, for lack of a better word, exploring all the little corners. And sometimes I wonder, what would it be like if I kept exploring all these little corners? Was that stronger writing or not? And a lot of people say, no, the current writing is much stronger, but I wonder. So no, if nothing else, I'd want to preserve it as this is what I started with. This is where I started.
That's fair. Yeah, it's so difficult because I went back and I rewrote my very first book, Lich Gates, three
Mm-hmm.
times. And at a certain point, you just have to acknowledge, like, no, it is done. Move on
Yes.
and continue to grow as a writer, both in style and storytelling. So it's very tempting to go back and say everything I wrote was shit, but in reality, and your success is proof that that is not true at all. So I don't know how you look back on like earlier mistakes you might have made. And I'm not implying that you made any mistakes. I'm just,
No, but
okay.
everybody did.
Yeah, we all do. Yeah, but
I even make mistakes today. And which direction is a mistake as well is also a question. Was it a mistake to, do a side quest in a bunch of details, or is it a mistake not to go on a side quest in a bunch of details?
mhm.
I'm going to slightly switch the topic here, but you'll sort of see what I mean.
Okay.
You write a character analyzing. Readers always say the main character is acting like an idiot. And it's because of the following phenomena. The main character has a decision, A or B. They have a lot of thinking behind A, and they have a lot of thinking behind B. And if they pick A, the readers that like B more are going to say that the main character is an idiot. The character picks B, though, the people that liked A will say the main character is an idiot. Either way, no matter how smart, no matter how well thought out the decision is, someone's going to say the main character is being dumb.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same way, doing things one way might be a mistake, but doing things other way might be a different set of mistakes.
Sure.
And there will always be a set of mistakes on the path you take.
Yeah. And you don't want to get lost in the weeds and the whataboutisms either.
Right.
Okay, fun fact number one. Before he was writing 16-book fantasy epics, he was an Excel and VBA developer working in accounting. And he never really left that part of his brain behind. He now tracks the entire world of Pallos across about 11 different Excel workbooks. The accountant became a fantasy author and just kind of brought the spreadsheets along for the ride. All right, let's get back into it. Well, let's go ahead and dive into the next one. This is a long one, so I'm just going to read this one out. So let's talk about inspiration for the concept of the series, a healer main character. The initial world of Pallos is based on Greek and Roman culture, while the oath Elaine takes is based on the Hippocratic oath established in ancient Greece for doctors. And from what I found in my research, your wife is a doctor, and Elaine's main class is a healer. So, did your wife being a doctor inspire you to make Elaine a healer? Did you start with Greek and Roman culture? Did that make you think of the Hippocratic Oath and that lead to Elaine being a healer? So, where did that inspiration for the story start? And did it kind of create a chain reaction for you?
So, yes, but from very different origins.
Okay.
So, first, my biggest inspiration, I've said this many times, it was Azareth Healer. Okay. It was the top story on Royal Road when I first started reading. I read it, I devoured it, I loved it. You know, it was one of, you know, the big stories that inspired me and got me writing. Big fan of Rhaegar, big fan of all he does. My one big issue with Azrith Healer and the big starting point for Dragon Eye Moons was, what if Ilya actually healed people? Because it's called Azrith Healer. She does no healing
Okay.
of other people. She regenerates, and that's where it comes from. And so my first question was, what if she actually healed people? So that was the seed. That was the start.
Okay.
And then I looked at the setting and I said, okay, well, medieval's nice and all, but everybody and their brother does medieval settings. You know what's also really cool? Roman setting is really cool. Let's go there. Okay, so now I'm, you know, Azra's healer. What if she actually healed Romans? Let's throw in some dinosaurs while I'm at it.
Yeah, why not?
You know? Yeah, because, you know, I think, you know, Roman legions, you know, fighting a T-Rex sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I go to the system. I build an elemental system. I say everyone has an elemental system. So now it's, you know, a fire-breathing T-Rex. Okay, you know, we're getting into cool stuff here.
So a dragon, basically.
Yeah. Well, kind of, but not quite.
Okay.
Dragons are also there. You know, it's called the dragon. Dragons. You know? From there, I actually went from Hunter x Hunter has the best encapsulation of this idea. But there is a strong theme throughout a lot of fantasy of power through restriction, where you say, I am going to narrow my focus. I'm going to make rules for myself. I can only operate in a certain way. In exchange for that, I get power. I get to be a lot stronger. And that was the core of the idea of her oath was, I am going to make a set of difficult rules for the main character to follow. That's going to be her beating core. That's going to be the heart of things that restricts how she can act, because murder hobo was all the rage at the time.
For sure.
And this was taking a set of rules that basically said, I cannot be a murder hobo. Yeah,
which is a really cool subversion of that trope.
Yeah. So, you know, and now we have those elements, and that forms the heart of Dragon Eye Moons. And then I said, okay, you know what? I need some cool, you know, spice for the world. And I was reading Blue Core at the time. And one of the things in Blue Core is one of the dragons owned the moon, which was actually some sort of space station or something or another. Like just, you know, a huge artifact in orbit that the dragon could, you know, tap into for massive laser whatever. Okay. And I said, you know what? That's kind of cool. I'm going to have a dragon flexing its powers and just watching the whole world. And I was like, okay, you know what? I need a title. I was at first going to call it, because I had a really cool rainbow magic system, I was going to call it All the Colors of Magic. And then I realized that was Terry Pratchett's novel. And I can't. That wouldn't work well for me.
No.
All the Colors of Magic, Terry Pratchett? You mean, no, I'd just get lost.
Yeah.
Nobody would ever hear of me. So, you know, from there, I reworked it a bit, and it's like, okay, we've got the moons, we're under the moons, great, beneath the Dragon Eye Moons, it's long, it's epic, cool, let's do it.
All right. And it's really fun the way stories can just evolve and untangle that way. I love exploring stories, especially in that concept phase where they just go, what if, and just sort of peel it apart that way.
And then the other part of that I thought of, and I always feel real pretentious every time I say this.
Go for it.
But, you know, skimming a little, I got some, by osmosis, a bit of knowledge of the Prince. And specifically the part about mercenaries really resonated with me, which is, if the government is paying all these adventurers guilds to, you know, protect people, what is the government actually doing? Because it's the government's job to protect people. The government should be the one hiring the soldiers to clear out the monsters. So, you know, I said, forget the Adventurers Guild. The people clearing out the monsters has to be the government. And so then from there, you know, the whole structure of the army, the rangers, the sentinels, because I was like, okay, you've got a group of monster hunters. What does it look like? And I thought, okay, you have traveling elites. Basically, they roam around solving problems for people. And there we go.
Yeah.
That started off the source, and there was quite a few iterations before I landed on what I did, but I'm pretty happy there. The other thing I really liked as well was the concept of 8, because I ended up with 8 elements in my wheel.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, you know what? It's going to be sort of not quite the prime number, but like the really important number. Forget making everything base 10. Everything's going to be sort of base 8. Your class unlocks at level 8, not 10.
Okay.
The big one is at level 64, not 100.
Mm-hmm.
You're aiming for 512, not 1,000. Just building a lot of the world around 8 just really gave it a lot of flavor and a lot of depth.
Yeah. It's surprising how a subtle tweak like that can make such a difference.
Yeah. And you don't have to draw any attention to it. People see it and they go, wait, what? Oh yeah, 64, that's 8 times 8. The 512 is like, oh wait, yeah, okay, 8 times 8 times 8. Okay, and
yeah.
It just adds a little bit extra to everything. And then I was like, okay, all the books I was reading, one of the things I really hated was the unlimited skills in them. So I said, limit the skills. And, I tried to read all the big stories at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I could tell what people liked about them and what they didn't like about them, and shape Dragon Eye Moons sort of in response to all that.
Yeah, it's a really smart approach to it. So I guess let's talk a little bit more about Elaine specifically. I saw a lot of comments that people think Elaine has ADHD or is neurodivergent. Was that intentional, or can you talk about that?
It is somewhat intentional and somewhat this is self-inserting. I have terrible ADHD, and I'm also fairly neural atypical. And as I said, I poured my heart and soul into Dragon Eye Moons, and a lot of that is seeing Elaine being ADHD and neurodivergent.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that's me.
Yeah.
A lot of just flat out me pouring myself into the character, into the world. And, a good amount of that is how I see things and how I would respond to them.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, like, the character is not me, and there should be a separation. But at the same time, I'm also proving the opposite is also very frequently true, where that's what it's like. And I also had a number of comments early on where it's like, well, this isn't what ADHD is like for me. And it's like, yeah, but you're not everybody that has ADHD.
Mm-hmm. I have severe combination, so I totally understand.
And there's a lot of people that say, actually, no, I feel so seen and so heard by this because this is exactly what I'm like. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Different people have different things. So yeah. I was going as well for some other neural atypical stuff. And then I realized I was coming off real stilted and in a way that was becoming obnoxious. For example, for the longest time, I never used a contraction.
Oh, okay.
That was actually in my early Nobody Ever Saw draft was Elaine not using a single contraction. But that was coming off. It stopped being a character trait and just started being obnoxious to read. Because it's first-person narration, so all the first-person narration was in the lack of contractions.
Yeah, you can't even just limit that to dialogue. You have to go fully immersive into it. So that makes sense.
And that was breaching the line from character trait to, dear God, why am I reading this?
Yeah, it's amazing the power simple contractions have on your reading experience. All right, fun fact number 2, the pen name. Selkie Myth almost had a completely different pen name. He's gone by Selkie Love and Selkie Heart at different points before landing on Selkie Myth. And honestly, for someone writing epic fantasy, it's hard to argue with the one he landed on. All right, let's get back into it. So Elaine spends most of the series surrounded by people who are more powerful than her. Was that a conscious choice to keep tension alive, or is it something about the character herself that kind of, I don't want to say resists becoming the strongest person in the room, but likes to surround herself with people who she can grow and learn from and grow?
One trope I really dislike is where are all the adults? Which is, plucky band of high schoolers needs to go save the world.
Mm-hmm.
Where are the 30-year-old professional world savers? What are they doing? Why aren't they helping? Why isn't this their job? Why does it fall to the band of plucky teenagers to solve? So a large part of this was a backlash to that idea of, look, you're a professional, you're joining a professional organization. The professionals there have been doing what you are doing for a lot longer than you've been doing it. Artemis's origin story looks almost exactly like Elaine's in a lot of ways. It was hinted at a few times. Why should Elaine be just as strong as herself 15 years from now, basically?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That was, her journey. So it's like, okay, she should be a lot stronger. And, I deal a lot with the themes of immortality and, length of time. And when you're dealing with people who have been around 5,000 plus years, of course they're going to be stronger. Of course they're going to be better.
Sure.
So when exploring that and dealing with those themes, she ends up being not quite the strongest. The other part as well is she really leans into the support role. She's got 2 offensive skills and 30 utility skills. Like, that is going to lend yourself to, I am the support of the group. And it's a little harder to be the driving force as the support. So, there was always some tension there. But, you look at the people she was with, especially later on, and like by the number she's there, but she's weaker than them in combat, again, because she's the support. If the support is the strongest person, you kind of have a problem with the team composition.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
And then what was sort of nice with the companion bond stuff was that is forced to be at the same level by definition. And that stalled things out a bit as, the character was catching up in levels. It's like, I haven't had a proper ding in a long time.
So why don't we talk a little bit about the society in Pallos, because the patriarchal society angle is one of the most, if not the most single debated element in the series, and it actually made some readers bounce off, while others say it really gives Elaine's journey meaning. So did you expect that divide? What is your take on that divide? Was it intentional? What do you think about readers' reactions to it?
When people say they bounce off it, it comes from one of 2 different places. And the place it comes from really matters. Motive matters here. When people read it and say, oh, God, this is too real. I can't do it. I don't want to, I want to escape with my fiction. I don't want to be, seeing how terrible things are again. And they bounce off. I'm completely fine with that. People read to escape. People read for enjoyment. If they say this element of society bothers me, I don't want to, be subject, I want to read something to escape. Great. Read something else, read something that makes you happy. But people say, oh no, sexism is a direct result of, sexual dimorphism, but because there's magic, there's no sexual dimorphism, and therefore there should be no sexism in the world. It's like, do you know people at all? Do you have any awareness of the human condition? That is not going to prevent one group of people from being terrible to another group of people.
Yeah.
Like, humans are quite tribal. They love drawing their lines. They love saying, this is my group, this is the other group. You can't find a society that does not have, sort of an inherent, there's the in-group and there's the out-group. And, in this particular one, I wanted to show the out-group from the perspective of the out-group. And LitRPG, especially back then, was extremely male-dominated.
Yeah.
Part of it was I could open some eyes to, wait, this is what it actually looks like. And everything I pulled from real life. I actually did a lot of research into historical Rome to pull examples from there and to pull what it was like. And for every message of I bounced off this because the sexism is unrealistic because, this could never exist like this, I got 3 messages saying, wow, this really opened my eyes. And, I'm looking at things from a new perspective here, because there's not a lot of literature with a predominantly male audience from a female perspective showing sexism like that.
Yeah.
So the strongest stories have some message. They make you think, they make you reflect on the world. And I think that was for lack of a better word, my contribution to it of, look, here's a thing, this is real, this is a problem, this is what it looks like, this is what it feels like, this is, how miserable it's like to be on the receiving end of things.
Yeah.
And, it gave my story heart and strength.
Is there any element of it you would change if you could go back, or do you feel like you really nailed it and you're happy with how you did it?
It's difficult because when it relates to the time skip, I am torn. I'm of two minds with it.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, I say, perhaps this would still exist. On the other hand, the whole point before that was laying the seeds to kill this. And if I hadn't done that, it invalidates her entire struggle and validates her entire story arc. So there was some tension there specifically where both ways were a mistake, just like I was saying earlier. Some parts of me say, I didn't hit it hard enough. Others said, I hit it too hard. Others said there was more to explore that I didn't explore. But at the same time, I don't want to write misery porn. I want to write a fun story.
Yeah.
And if everything is miserable all the time and readers leave in droves, you send no message.
So web serial readers give feedback in real time. And how much has an audience reaction ever genuinely changed where a story went, either in a minor scene or a structural shift?
There was one comment that made a major change that gave me some ideas. Originally, Elaine was going to be a lot more solo than she ended up being. Someone comment gave me the idea for Iona, and it was pretty early on. However, for the most part, reader comments have done very little to change the story because I'm usually 10 chapters ahead on my beta, and my Patreon is 25 chapters ahead. So Royal Road is almost an entire book behind.
Yeah.
And when you're an entire book behind, the comments are not going to change very much because it's almost set in stone by then.
Yeah, that's true. It's really hard to go back.
Changed so much though, because one of the skills I feel I have is being able to distinguish good feedback from bad feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very generous with giving out the beta reader role. And so it's like, okay, look, all these people are helping me out of the goodness of their heart and to read, quite a few chapters ahead. I'm going to listen to them. I'm going to, take their feedback in. When they say I'm making a mistake, I look at it and I fix the mistake. Because I trust them a lot to give me good advice, and they have not really steered me wrong.
That's great. It's really wonderful to have a support system like that. So there are two questions I have that are no spoilers, and then we're going to get into the spoiler section.
Okay.
What are some unique advantages that LitRPG has over other genres, in your opinion?
It hits readers over the head with the progression, which makes readers happy. It is clear, defined, measurable. And there's a lot of people, and life itself is not measurable. And, you go to the gym, you lift a bunch of weights, you can't see any progress. You don't know you've made any progress. But LitRPG sort of removes that question in a way and shows the progress, and it makes people happy. And that's what it comes down to is, it's a shortcut to making people happy, and it's a way to easily track what's going on.
Yeah.
Unlike other stories, which are like, yeah, this happened, but there's no real background for it.
So let's talk about what's next. Talk about the series you're working on now.
Song of the Gift Giver. Okay, basically, the short version is I read, 50 million words of Harry Potter fan fiction. I was like, I'm going to write something, my own thing, but I'm going to write it in my way, in my style. I'm not going to use the same setting. I'm not going to use the same place, but the idea of a magic school, yes. I want to write something like that.
Yeah, Magic Academy is a fantastic trope.
Yes, I came up with my own plot. It's the same sort of idea, but very different. But, people reading it say, we can see the heart that was there. We can see, sort of the love for the series that was there. And I grew up, reading Harry Potter, reread the books a bunch. The author, deciding to melt down on Twitter, notwithstanding, the books themselves were a, magical part of growing up. and there's still magic in them, and the idea is to capture that magic.
Yeah. So what are you, besides the Magic Academy side of it, what are you most excited about for this story? What's really like driving you?
Um, the other part is I read a lot of Worm, and I'm excited for the elements I have from there.
Okay.
And given that Worm tends to be, oh God, there's definitely dark undertones to this story. You read the saga of Bjorn, and each little individual part is okay. This is fine, this is all right, this is a mild atrocity, and then you put it all together, and you're like, oh dear Lord. And
Okay.
I had a lot of fun writing it backward or presenting it to readers backwards. So they
Oh,
started illusion and
okay.
they slowly saw each prior step. And each prior step recontextualized what they got beforehand.
Okay. That's a really difficult technique to pull off. You're doing the whole series that way?
Well, I had 60 verses planned, and I've done all 60 verses already.
Okay.
And I'm like, I did an epigraph every chapter for the first 75 chapters, and now I'm out. Sorry, guys.
Where can people read this? Is it on Royal Road yet, or is it in your Patreon?
Yes, it's on Royal Road.
Okay, so I'll link to that in the interview as well. So let's get into some of the spoilery stuff.
So I might die any minute now.
Okay.
Let me grab my laptop.
Okay. Okay, fun fact number 3. Someone once asked Selkie what he would do if he could do anything besides write, and his answer was retire and do whatever catches his attention on any given day. That's the whole answer. No elaboration. Respect. Let's get back into it. Okay, Selkie, thank you so much for dropping by the channel, genuinely. So let's get into the spoilery stuff. Specifically, Book 7's time skip, the Fey Realm time skip. It is essentially starting a new world inside the same story. So what were you afraid readers would think when you made that call? Or were you really, really excited for it?
I mean, I knew it wouldn't be popular. I knew a lot of people would leave the story over it. It's worth mentioning, it was planned since before I started writing. And I was able to first drop a hint in chapter 5, which when you've got every single thing to start setting up in a story, that's really early to start dropping, foreshadowing hints that late in the series.
Hmm.
And I continued to sprinkle hints throughout. And at the time, as you say, you get live reactions. A lot of readers knew something was coming. They
Okay.
knew something was up. They could, see that there were all these hints here. And, some people hated it. Some people loved it. Some people thought, okay, we'll give Selkie a chance. It's been fun so far. And you know what? If people read the first 7 books and said, I'm done here, that's also a perfectly acceptable stopping point.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to force anyone to read. I'm not going to say, well, you should try it. You could be done there. And I won't blame anyone who's done there. At the same time, it also gets lots of credit from readers as the single most emotional scene. There is not a dry eye, in the house after reading the end of 7.
Okay.
And, that also, it makes me a little sad at how well I can invoke sad emotions. And it's much harder to invoke happy emotions.
Hmm.
But, the strength of the emotions I invoked there, to me, is a win. And, for people that stuck it out all the way, they see the final bit that I was able to actually tie together. And I had that in mind as well at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But, that was really fun to be able to tie back and like, this was indeed all planned out.
Yeah, what I was reading about book 16 is that the end is unputdownable and that people sob over the ending.
There were enough books that fumbled the landing trying to do some big cool twist or something. I was like, no, keep it simple, keep it what people expected, land with 2 feet on the ground,
Okay.
don't try to style it and fumble and fall on my face. We've all seen what happened to Game of Thrones, and I've seen so many otherwise excellent books try to do something really fancy for the ending and just fall flat on their face. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to have the most exciting of endings. It's going to be very predictable. Everyone will have seen it coming. But I'm okay with that. I don't want, as I said, the Game of Thrones reputation.
So, pivoting a little bit from that, in book 7, Elaine uses her immortality skill on a number of people, and to which they get a visit from White Dove. And with that said, doors? That's a question I got from someone, and I'm excited to hear your answer on that one.
Basically, I was writing a lot of interesting and clever curses, and I ran out of gas. And I was like, okay,
You're
you know
like,
what?
I'm tired.
Yeah, lazy one-word curse, doors. Okay, there we go. We won't explain what it means. And sometimes that's the best thing to do. It's the same as the Pastos incident. You can't overuse this technique, but not explaining something is often much stronger than explaining it. But again, if you never explain anything, it just gets obnoxious. So
Yeah.
you really have to reserve it. It's like dick jokes. There's exactly one dick joke in the entire series, but a lot of people, laughed at it because it's well placed, it's well done, it is somehow tasteful, but
A
yet it's also
tasteful dick
funny,
joke. That
and
takes
appropriate,
skill. That takes skill.
and you can't overdo it, but you gotta do it just the right amount.
By the way, the person who asked that question is one of my dearest friends, and he said he absolutely loves your story and it means so much to him. So, wanted to pass that along.
Great, thank you. It's always heartwarming to hear that.
So, was Iona planned from day one, or was she a later creation?
Well, as I said earlier, no, she was a slightly later creation, but it's still very, very, very early on. So, end of the book, end of the series, spoilers. I debated a long time over what domain Elaine should be taking.
Hmm.
And my very, very, very V 1.0, this is still half baked thought, was, oh, she will replace the moon goddesses, plural, and become the goddess of the moons. And so, two becoming one sort of thing,
Hmm.
where, they go and retire and do whatever. And Elaine stepping in. And I was like, you know what? No, it'd be more fun if she did it with someone else, because otherwise this is a very long, very lonely journey.
That's true.
And then I was actually sort of trying to sprinkle in some hints that each of them would take one of the moons. That is actually why in that one scene, when the moons are revealed, one is pale yellow and one is pale blue. That was to mimic the radiance and the ice that Elaine and Iona had.
Oh, okay.
Because at the time, their first was both celestial. Their second was where they were exactly opposites of each other. Because one was light and fire, and the other was dark and water.
Hmm.
So, same, the opposite, complementary. Their skills, their elements were actually based off each other in that way. Celestial is the same as celestial.
Hmm.
Radiance is the exact opposite of ice, and then space complements gravity.
Okay.
So, they were very tightly planned together that way. And in the same way, I had planned that as the first one, but I didn't really like it because we didn't have other things of them retiring. And Elaine ended up being far too much the sun. She, throughout this series, she was constantly the blazing sun, the shining light. To borrow Eastern mythology a bit, she was too yang. And Iona was the yin.
Hmm.
And you can't have the yang becoming a moon. It doesn't work. From all that, that initial plan went away, and it took a long time to figure out the domains.
Was it ever explained why Elaine was isekai'd?
No, because the thing is, well, like, unless someone is being specifically summoned over, which I'm not the biggest fan. Well, it's a trope. It's a way of getting over.
Hmm.
Like, there's never a reason. There doesn't have to be a reason. And related, there is no. What happens on Earth beforehand is almost never relevant. So, the people that go through the paragraphs and the paragraphs and the paragraphs of, what goes on before they die and, get sent over, none of that matters to the story. It's just delaying the start of the story for dubious reasons. The only one I've seen done very well is, again, Azrith Healer, where it showed her as a kickboxer wanting to keep pursuing the profession, but knowing she can't because there's no future in being a kickboxer, whereas there is a future in being a medical student. And so, literally the character is in the middle of leaving her kickboxing gym to go to school, where she steps around a corner and steps into that world.
Mm-hmm.
But apart from that, I've seen all sorts of, I won't say nonsense, but like I've seen, 4 or 5 chapters of, this is an isekai. Why do I have 5 chapters here before we, hit the setting event? That's why I actually started with the being plucked out by the god, because that's the start. I decided to turn a bit on its head, and you're going to a new world. Here's a bunch of nerfs. I'm going to, Swiss cheese your memory before you get started. You're starting getting kicked down a bit,
Mm-hmm.
which again is not something, you really see before Dragon Eye Moons. I think I'm one of the first to do that.
Will Elaine get to meet Library Elaine again and spend any time in her class selection library, or is that something never available to her again? I know the series is done, but this one came up and I thought it was interesting.
She could. One thing that needs to remember is she is librarian. It is herself. But at the end of the series, this is the spoiler bit. I'm going to give people a second to really not hear the spoiler.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the series, she becomes a goddess, and of course, she can manifest a second copy of herself, the librarian, to talk with.
Mm-hmm.
She can manifest the class up tower again, but it's not quite the same. And that's one of those ending chapters is she's saying goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time she says goodbye, they merge back together for the last time. It is her inner self guiding her.
All right, so that's all of my questions. How do people give you money? What is the best way to follow you, to interact with you? Talk to me.
So I am most active on my Discord. I am almost all seeing and all knowing there. You type something in one of the channels, I will read it. I won't necessarily respond, but I do read just about everything that goes on in there. Patreon and Amazon are the best ways to get me money. Amazon is where you would read Dragon Eye. Get a Kindle Unlimited subscription, please. Read it all through KU. It'll be much cheaper than buying each individual book. Asking people to buy that many books is a bit much, and I'd rather prefer that they get it cheaply. Spend $12 and read it all in a month.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure talking to you, and I wish you only the best in your endeavors.
Thank you very much.
So if you are watching this, my darling, and you haven't picked up Beneath the Dragon Eye Moons yet, book 1 is called Oathbound Healer, and I will link it below. I have also done a first look on book 1 as well as a series overview. So it's been a very Selkie Myth heavy month so far. And I'm really excited to see what you think of those videos. So I'm going to link those below and probably do some title cards too. Make sure you check those out because I'm really proud of those videos, okay? And if you want to follow Selkie's work or check out what's happening over at Mango Media, those links are also going to be down there, as well as his Discord, which he mentioned is what he likes to be on the most. So if you enjoyed this interview, the most useful thing you can do is share it with one person who you think would love this series. That's it. That's all I ask. So thank you for being here. Thank you for watching to the end. That means the world to me, and I am so glad you're here. So thank you again, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.